From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's coming up. K-State's Glynn Tonsor is featured on this week's cattle market segment. He'll go over last week's rally in the cash and futures cattle markets. And he'll talk about a much improved outlook for Kansas cattle feedlot returns closing out this year and into the first part of 2020. Following Glynn, then, K-State's Kevin Herbel and Hannah Shear will share highlights from their new study on the returns to cow-calf production in Kansas. They were able to link several management practices to cow-calf economic performance. Later on, Jeff Wickman has this week's 4-H segment. He'll talk with K-State's Beth Hinshaw about the upcoming Kansas 4-H Leadership Weekend. All that and more right here on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Welcome once more to another Agriculture Today on the K-State Radio Network. We have several positive vibes to cover in the cattle market segment for this week, and we bring by once more Glynn Tonsor, livestock economist, K-State Research and Extension. In a moment, we'll talk about a much improved cattle feeding returns scenario for feeders out there as we look ahead, Glynn. But looking back to last week, well, once again, we saw some upward move in the markets, which was enthusing.
Yeah, we did, and actually across the board, both literally the board, futures market and cash markets, and across different weight classes, and actually in the meat market, we had across the board up for the week. So it's not always the case we could say that, so it makes it easy to summarize. But let's just start actually with the board. So the live CME October contract closed just under 110 on Friday. That was up about $2 from last week. As a side note, I'm going to give a couple of comparisons for other points in time this fall. That's up a full $15 from September 9th, and actually it's up almost $3 from where we were on August 8th. I'm using August 8th because that's the pre-Tyson Holcomb event date for comparison here. Round that out, feeder cattle on the board, October contract, 144 and change on Friday, up about $2.50 for the week. Again, up almost $15 from early September, and then up from about 138, 139 on August 8th. Round this out with the cash market, live cattle, depending on which state I'd quote, was 109, 110. It was up about $2 for the week. Feeder cattle, AMS called the Kansas market mixed, so it depends on exactly what weight class I would quote for you here. I wrote down two lot loads here. 97 head, 506 pounds, went for 162 this past week, and then a heavier lot, 332 head, weigh in 781, went for 149. As a quick side note on that, those, particularly the lighter weight, would be up a hair from the prior week. That's consistent with beefbasis.com projections. If you ran that tool now for the Salina market, most of our listeners know I like to use that for projecting feeder cattle prices. That's right on par with that, and that looks like it'll be the case for the balance of October. As a note, that suggests that a cow-calf producer that has cost of about $900 for the year is a break-even here in 2019. So the break-even price of 5.5 weight calf is $162 is the point of that. And then finally, just kind of round out the markets for the week, the cutout on Friday, choice closed at $215. That's up about $3.50 from the prior Friday. I'll note quickly that the choice cutout peaked at about $242, actually on August 21st, a few days after the fire, and was actually $217 before the fire. Select cutout $189, up $2 from the week. Similar price pattern for what the choice over the last few weeks. Put that in a nutshell. Across the board, meat and cattle up for the week. Cattle are up compared to where we were early in September, and actually ahead of where we were before the fire. Meat is down from where it was post-fire, and actually down a little bit from where it was pre-fire.
But how noteworthy is it, Glynn, that we've seen the market attain levels that do exceed what we saw before the Tyson fire episode?
Well, so it won't surprise our listeners. I get in questions like this a lot ever since the event. And there's a lot of things that go into the establishment of prices in live cattle, feeder cattle, and wholesale beef markets. And the fire and the supply chain disruption certainly played into that, but it's not the only thing. The fact that the markets have recovered is a good thing. I probably don't have to convince anybody of that, if you're a cattle producer, that is. The fact that the wholesale beef market has pulled back isn't necessarily a good thing, depending on how we want to talk about it from a producer's perspective. But what I want to highlight here is markets will do what markets do if we let them. And the sense was there was a strong reaction the week after the event. We've belabored that, and not just me, many analysts have done that. But over time, if the fundamentals support different prices, as we work through, get past the surprises and the uncertainties, the markets will reestablish new equilibriums in econ jargon, and effectively that's what's occurred. The fact we've been able to pull both fed and feeder cattle prices up is a really good thing. I would submit to you the strong wholesale beef prices are part of that, because that's gave buying power, if you like, to buying cattle, whether it's live cattle or feeder cattle. We're going to get to feedlot margins here in a minute. It's not by accident those margins have improved, consistent with live cattle price improvement. So there's a lot of good things here, but if I had to put it in a bow, markets adjust. They adjust hard when we have a shock, which is what happened with the fire. And if we give them a little bit of time, which time isn't free, I'm not trying to act like it is free, but that's what's occurred at this point, then the markets will adjust and go, quote unquote, where they need to go. And at this case, that means cattle prices are actually ahead of where we were before the fire.
You have additional information on the meat demand seen, both domestic and export usage. This is something that you calculate regularly, the meat demand indices. Start on the domestic side. How does that look as of the update through August?
Yeah, so these values would be for the month of August compared to August of 2018, and I do it separately for beef, pork, and chicken, as you've noted there, and actually all three are down compared to August of 18. Beef specifically is down just about 2% from August of 18. Beef is up 5 of the 8 months that I have measurement for here so far in 2019. I highlight that because on balance, we still have a good demand situation for the year, but the month of August was a hiccup. Pork was down almost 11% in August. That's more worrisome, but even there, some word of caution is noted because it's the first annual decline that's occurred this year. So whether that's a hiccup in August or not is to be determined. We need to watch that. And then chicken was down about 2.5%. A little more worrisome there is half the months chicken's been down, half it's been positive so far this year. That's the domestic demand story. As you noted, I also make separate measurements for export demand. Most of our listeners know we send a different mix of products. It's the combination of export and domestic demand that's collective demand that we need to care about. Export demand for beef down 9% compared to August of 19. 5 of the 8 months so far this year have been positive for beef. So again, we want to watch and see if August is an outlier or not, but it's been good overall for the year. Pork demand, probably the biggest thing this month that stands out. Export demand's up almost 25% for the month of August on pork. And actually, we've had 4 really strong months in a row. There's a lot of trade challenges ongoing in the last 72 hours. There's been a lot of optimism in the media about Chinese purchasing and so forth. Of the 3 meats, we're most likely to see that to show up in the pork complex, so we need to keep watching that. And then I have another one, broiler export demand index, off 5% for the month of August, and it's only been up 3 months so far this year. So the month of August has some worrisome signs in it year over year here. If just to summarize it, there's a potential for the real big boost in pork exports to have some spillover benefit on the beef side. We need to monitor that for the rest of 2019.
Now let's get into your latest calculations, if we might, on feedlot returns for Kansas feed yards moving forward. This has been, quite honestly, a grim story for some time, and it's still in the red is the level of return. However, as one looks to the latter part of this year into the early part of 2020, the numbers have taken a dramatic turn for the better, you say.
They have. And to remind our listeners, I update this monthly. It's on agmanager.info. You're welcome and encouraged to go make use of that. These updates and numbers I'm going to share as of Thursday, October 10th. They'll get updated again about the middle of November, so watch for those. But as you said, we do have ongoing negative projections for most of 2019, and I'll just pick on October, for example, since where we're sitting, is the number that you'll find there now is a projection for a loss of $158 per steer. That reflects somebody that had no price protection on corn, feeder cattle, or fed cattle, as I've noted before. November, minus 115, and then we get to the December closeouts out through the front half of 2020, and that's where the real improvement has occurred in recent weeks. Specifically, closeouts in December, so those be steers coming out and sold in December. The number you'll find there is a projection of plus $23.
A profit, you say?
A profit, that is. Now, albeit it's small, but we're not talking minus $200 like we've done in some recent months. The October through December of 2019 projections are all up about $100 per steer compared to where I was a month ago. And this is consistent with where we started off our session today, Eric, was fed cattle prices have improved. They're now a little bit ahead of where we were pre the Holcomb event. There's lots of reasons for that we've talked about before, but that pulls up these projected margins. Now, individual months are still negative, but we're on balance getting closer to some positives, some small negatives, and so forth as we look out into 2020. Particularly if you look out, so for example, March is plus $20, May is break even at plus $2. I'm highlighting those because those become the relevant months for selling fed cattle that is supportive of today's feeder cattle prices. And the feeder cattle prices that are coming up is consistent with these improved and break even to slight positive projections on feedlot margins. So lots of things have improved in the feedlot sector looking forward, particularly starting in December on into 2020. And that gives us some optimism that maybe the worst of this, as you say, painful situation is behind us or nearly behind us.
Still need to watch to assure that the cost of gain and the cost of feed in particular doesn't escalate here as corn harvest sorts itself out.
All the above. And moreover, as we look out to next year, right, the cost of gain buying corn to finish steers next May and June is going to have a lot to do with what the corn market prospects next year are. Mm-hmm. For our listeners who don't regularly take advantage of it, I encourage them to listen to Dan O'Brien, speaks about the corn market. You know, I don't have to tell anybody here that feed costs are a big deal for livestock producers. This right here is a projected cost of gain, gives you a projected margin. If your cost of gain are better than I have in here, of course your margins are better. But the corollary is true, too. If you have higher costs than I have here, it's worse. So I have a couple of kind of canned sentences in the monthly report. Please compare this to your own situation. This is a barometer, and it's truly meant as just a general trend barometer. All our listeners, I do encourage them to tweak the numbers to fit their situation.
Nonetheless, it's a very welcome improvement in the numbers from the cattle feeding returns that you've calculated. And by the way, producers, he has these posted on the agmanager.info website for your review, agmanager.info. As always, Glynn, thanks for the input. We'll welcome you back soon.
Thanks for having me on, Eric.
Glynn Tonsor, livestock economist, K-State Research and Extension, providing this week's cattle market analysis and commentary. Up next, that look at another analysis out of the K-State Agricultural Economics Department, which zeroed in on cow-calf production and the returns to same. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome back. You are tuned to Agriculture Today. For you now, a closer look at an effort just out from the Agricultural Economics Department at K-State. It is deemed a snapshot of Kansas cow-calf producers, and this got at the elements of cow-calf production and profitability. We brought over 2 individuals who are largely responsible for this. Kevin Herbel with us, the Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association, and agricultural economics graduate researcher Hannah Shear, also with a hand in this. Well, Kevin, we do know the Kansas Farm Management Association has long maintained cow-calf enterprise numbers through the routine gathering of information each year by the association. This is a next step forward, right?
That is correct, Eric. We have been for many years collecting this enterprise data on the cow-calf enterprises and working to put that together in a way that allows producers to benchmark, compare themselves. You know, whether they're KFMA members or not, we do make that information publicly available for everyone to use to benchmark, but particularly for our own KFMA members to see how their management efforts line up against others. For probably a decade or a little better, we've been putting together almost every year a multi-year comparison, looking at the differences between high, mid, and low profit cow-calf producers, typically looking there at a 3 to 5 year average of the cow-calf enterprise data and allowing some comparisons, looking at things at a more detailed level related to that. As we worked on that, and just over a year ago at the Risk and Profit Conference during a presentation on some of that data, discussion began of a need to bring more production information into a part of this analysis that we're looking to do. A lot of our data that we collect within KFMA is very specific to the financial side. We do, when we go to enterprise analysis, have some production-related information that becomes a part of that. But here we were looking at an opportunity to dive into that at a deeper level with some very focused, specific items to begin looking at. There was a committee, a subset of our KFMA economists that was assembled to work through the process of defining a new data collection document to put together to help with that process. And we started that in August of 2018. And by the end of the year, had the document put together. And so for the 2018 year, we collected this additional information on our cow-calf producers and sought to see how many we could match up with those that were completing the records at a level to do enterprise analysis, as well as to even allow others who weren't doing the enterprise analysis to complete the data collection instrument as well.
So just to stress here, you are really interested in the actual management practices employed by cow-calf producers.
That is correct.
And this was done by way of a survey. Let's bring Hannah in here to talk about that. That basically complements what KFMA has been gathering all these years, right?
Yes. So the survey wanted to collect some of the management decisions that they're making on the cow-calf level from the producer standpoint. So decisions that they make about conditioning for their calves, breeding decisions that they make when they calve, fall versus spring, as well as feeding decisions that they make for their livestock. So they wanted to put out this survey so that we could potentially match these management decisions with the enterprise data that's already collected. So we could potentially determine what is the economic impact of a particular management decision.
So once you merge these together, you come up with a whale of a lot of data, don't you, Kevin? And as far as each of these particular practices and their influence on profitability.
That's correct. And we did, as we worked through the summary, as Hannah helped us work through the summary of putting these together, looked at it regionally across the state to see if there were differences that appeared the way production practices were occurring in eastern Kansas, central Kansas, western Kansas. We looked at some comparison based on whether or not the producers were selling calves at weaning or retaining them for a time, as well as some comparisons looking at the profitability levels and if there were differences between those who were our high-profit farms, the low-profit farms, and any of these production practices showing up there, as well as some size of cow herd comparisons. And I think there's some interesting things that show up across the board on each of those areas. Keep in mind, as we look at this was a 1-year effort at this point, so not a whole lot of real strong conclusions that we would look to draw out of this or make at this point in time. But I think a lot of interesting things that do come out of the process that set the stage for future steps and even ways that we may present our enterprise analysis data in future years.
By no means in the time we have availed to us today can we cover each of these management practices and how they influence that profitability. But Hannah, as you look at these, what were among the standout findings in these given areas?
So we tried to condense our thoughts into kind of 3 categories: the breeding and calving season, the preconditioning practices, and our feed and pasture management decisions. Most of our findings confirmed what we anticipated most cow-calf producers were doing or thinking. One of examples of that is just what is the criteria that producers are using to select a bull. So they had the choices between EPDs, a visual appraisal, or the price, and they just ranked those based on what they considered most important. And obviously, EPDs came out to be the number one response, which we figured most producers would probably say given that option. So not necessarily groundbreaking information, but
it reaffirms what might have been previously thought.
Yeah. We had some questions about the bull breed selection by region and the cow breed selection by region, but that is one of the questions that we are working on kind of rewording for the 2019 survey, just because with cow-calf, again, there's so many, they could have multiple herds within one farm that they might operate differently. So just kind of reworking our questions for that. But the calving season followed what we anticipated, the fall, spring, with most of the West region having more of a spring calving season.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting that the eastern part of the state did show a lot stronger tendency toward more fall calving to be taking place.
And when you talk about feed and pasture management, that canvasses a lot of things. So what did you find there that was of note?
Yeah, so the main feeding question that we asked was, what's the length of your hay feeding season? And we looked at it from the west, central, east kind of standpoint, and obviously we saw that our eastern region tended to have the longer hay feeding season than our west did, which I think, again, knowing the Kansas agriculture was not a new finding, but recognizing that you have to split out your producers depending on whether or not they're feeding out their calves or if they're selling them upon weaning makes a difference.
One of the things that we will be changing as we move this data collection forward is collecting more information, kind of expanding what we ask relative to feeding practices, looking into some things regarding grazing of milo and corn stalks, looking at utilization of grazing of cover crops and various things from that standpoint, and trying to bring some of that information in to see how the management is taking place. There is a portion of one of the fact sheets that we'll be posting here shortly, looking at kind of an economic summary of information on the feeding. And you would expect, well, those that are feeding hay less days should have more pasture acres per cow because they're likely grazing more. And the reality was our data showed that, which I was glad to see that from the standpoint that it substantiated those things lined up. But it kind of drew us to looking where should we dig deeper into showing what this is telling us. And another portion of that was looking at the number of days feeding hay and their total non-pasture feed costs, which of course go from those with less days feeding, a little less than $300 per cow non-pasture feed costs, on up to those with over 150 days having $466 of non-pasture feed costs. Well, that's not unexpected that you'd see that comparison. But now looking at, can we dig deeper into seeing what's making up these differences and some of the profitability differences between that, and see if our data can help provide information to guide management decisions in a way to lead cow-calf producers to opportunities for greater profitability.
Hannah, for the here and now, this information is available to producers both in the main document as well as these fact sheets that are now posted as well, that they can start benchmarking, making comparisons, right?
Yes, I think they can make kind of summary comparisons. I don't think we can go as far as to say, oh, my profits are low because of this specific management decision. But I do think they can start categorizing themselves and maybe seeing areas where, with a little more detailed attention and maybe record keeping, they can make some better decisions potentially.
And all of it is available on agmanager.info. Again, the main document is entitled A Snapshot of Kansas Cow-Calf Producers, and these three fact sheets that are derived from this are also there at agmanager.info, just freshly posted. And we're looking forward to still more from this initiative as the two of you pursue more information on what makes for the management success of a cow-calf operation. Thanks for coming over, sharing this look today.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you.
Kevin Herbel with us from the Kansas Farm Management Association, its executive director, and graduate researcher in agricultural economics at K-State, Hannah Shear. We'll return after this break. This is Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today, and welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. Today's agricultural news headlines are coming your way now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the United States and China did reach that partial trade agreement on Friday, following a series of meetings in Washington between trade officials on both sides and a meeting on Friday between President Trump and China's top trade negotiator, Vice Premier Liu He. The U.S. agreed to hold off on scheduled increases in tariffs on billions of dollars of Chinese goods in exchange for China expanding purchases of American goods, including agricultural products. China is expected to make between $40 and $50 billion in agricultural purchases. In exchange, the U.S. has agreed not to raise tariffs on $250 billion worth of Chinese goods from 25 to 30%. The two sides are expected to meet again in Chile in the next couple of months, according to press reports. Now, the U.S. exported just over 13 million metric tons of soybeans to China in 2018-19, down from nearly 28 million metric tons in 17-18. The USDA said China bought just over 2 million metric tons of U.S. beans and 130,000 metric tons of U.S. wheat from September the 22nd to October the 3rd. China has stepped up purchases of U.S. beans this year, totaling just short of 5 million metric tons for delivery in the 1920 marketing year. That total was just a little over 1 million metric ton at this time last year. China also has bought 142,000 tons of pork for 1920. According to the American Farm Bureau Federation, U.S. agricultural exports to China have fallen from $19.5 billion in 2017 to $9 billion last year and were down another $1 billion in the first half of this year. Brazilian crop agency experts expect that country's farmers will produce a record amount of soybeans in the 1920 season as producers increase the area planted, and better weather is expected there for the end of this year. Brazilian farmers will grow 120.5 million metric tons of beans this season, for which planting has already started. That's an increase of nearly 5% from last season. The area planted forecast to rise 2% to 36.5 million hectares. That relatively small increase in the area planted due to uncertainty about international demand in the face of the continuing trade dispute between the U.S. and China, which is the world's largest customer, as CONAB reported. And the USDA has corrected its figures released back on October the 7th on U.S. agricultural export and imports for August, essentially swapping the figures for the two categories. The USDA now says that exports in August totaled $11.2 billion, imports at $10.4 billion, putting the monthly balance at a surplus $813 million. The USDA on October the 7th reported the figures as exports of $10.5 billion against imports of $11.2 billion. That showed a trade deficit of $813 million. The adjustment by the USDA means that the U.S. has only registered a trade deficit in agriculture 3 months of fiscal year 2019 and would indicate a deficit for the entire fiscal year is now far less likely. Want to remind you that a former executive environmental editor for National Geographic magazine will be speaking this evening here at Kansas State University. Dennis Dimmick, who worked at Nat Geo for 35 years, will be presenting Living in the Human Age. This is a fast-moving talk and slideshow that looks at the unique challenges that humans face in a world where the population is growing and the demand for food is greater than ever. This talk will be the latest in the university's Henry C. Gardner Global Food Systems Lecture Series. It begins at 7 o'clock this evening at K-State's McCain Auditorium, and admission is free. So if you're in the Manhattan area this evening, you might want to take that in. If you can't be at the lecture, you can go to the website, simply search for the Henry C. Gardner Global Food Systems Lecture Series online. A link to the live broadcast of Dennis Dimick's talk will be available at that website. And do want to remind you producers as well that research updates will be the cornerstone of K-State's annual Swine Day. That's planned for Thursday, November the 21st. It'll incorporate the latest K-State research information on feed, on hog livability, on management, and on disease mitigation. The event will kick off with the Technology Trade Show at 8 o'clock that morning, this at the K-State Alumni Center. All will conclude around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There'll be afternoon sessions from a technical and production support manager with Seaboard Foods, Josh Floor, on the decision processes and implementing a nutritional program in an integrated swine system. And from Prairie Swine Health Services, Egan Brockhoff will be sharing what the Canadian swine industry is doing to prevent the introduction of African swine fever into that country. Registration, $25 per person if paid by November the 12th, and $50 after that date or at the door. Lunch and breaks are included, and all information can be found at ksuswine.org. On now to this week's edition of Tree Tales with K-State Forester Charlie Barden. Charlie?
Fall can be a great season to plant new trees in the landscape, and many areas have had above-average rainfall in July and August, so soils have a higher moisture content than typical this time of year. The prime season for fall planting is from mid-September to late October. Evergreens should be transplanted no later than mid-October to give them an adequate chance to reestablish new roots before winter really begins. Deciduous tree species which lose their leaves in winter can actually be planted later into the fall, even as late as Thanksgiving. The difference between the deciduous and evergreen trees is that evergreens use more water during the winter than hardwoods, which drop their leaves. Thus, most conifers need about 6 weeks of mild weather to settle into their new home before the cold shuts down root growth for the winter. If planting a containerized tree, make sure to unwrap or cut any girdling roots that are circling around the root ball. These girdling roots will not unwrap on their own after planting, but will continue to grow in diameter and may interfere with trunk expansion and other root growth. Especially if you want to add a tree to your yard for its bright-colored autumn foliage, October is a great time to visit local nurseries to find a tree with that color. The tendency to develop bright fall colors is genetically controlled with some climate and weather influence, so buying a tree in the fall already showing these colors helps ensure that tree will color up nicely every year. For all fall plantings, make sure you water the tree in well, and large landscape trees may require watering every other week during the winter if it is dry, and especially important for evergreens. Also, apply a thick layer of mulch to the ground after it really turns cold, usually in early October. This will protect the tender new roots from harsh fluctuations in the soil temperature and prevent frost heaving damage. You've been listening to Tree Tales. I'm Charles Barden, a forester with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Charlie. And this is Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. Leadership, a Jungle of Fun, is the theme for this year's Kansas 4-H Leadership Weekend, which includes the Kansas Youth Leadership Forum and the Kansas Volunteer Forum. Here to preview both events is Southeast Area 4-H Specialist Beth Hinshaw. Beth, the Kansas 4-H Leadership Weekend is in November 23rd and 24th, and this really has a lot of components to it.
Yeah, it really does. You know, we always say that 4-H has something for everyone, and this weekend encompasses both our Kansas Youth Leadership Forum, and that is for young people who are 14 to 18. But at the same time, we offer our Kansas 4-H Volunteer Forum, and that's for any of our adult volunteers working in any of our units across Kansas.
Talk a little bit about the Leadership Forum. It's called a Jungle of Fun.
Yes, the Kansas Youth Leadership Forum is put on by the Kansas 4-H Youth Leadership Council. each year. And so, they've got a fun jungle theme. But the fun things that happen and the important components of the Kansas Youth Leadership Forum are opportunities for young people to build their leadership skills. And they do that through workshops, delegate groups, inspirational speakers, and more. And we have an amazing lineup of workshops that the young people can take part in, all kinds of things about our international 4-H program. We've got folks coming out from Kansas State University to talk to kids about, making that college and career decision. And then we have a number of volunteers or extension staff from across the state offering different workshops about public speaking or thank you notes or Kansas award applications, how to think about being on youth council and what that means, and finding your spark. So just all kinds of really great opportunities through workshops.
Yeah, matter of fact, I think I counted up there are 16 different workshops, so people will really want to go to the website and start looking over some of their options because some of these are offered at the same time and multiple times.
Yes, and everybody will have 3 workshops by the time the weekend's over, and everything I think is offered at least 2 different times.
You mentioned that the Youth Council is responsible for setting all of this up, so they also then invited these people to be part of the work sessions?
Yeah, they sure did. They have a Kansas Youth Leadership Forum committee that works all year, and so they set up the theme, they invite the speaker, and then they invite people to do the workshops as well. Another important component of this is we'll be electing our next Youth Leadership Council. So we'll have candidates who are running for the regional representative positions, and also during the weekend we have our interviews for National 4-H Conference. So it's really jam-packed for our young people.
So how long do people serve on the council?
The young people who come on the council through National 4-H Conference will have a 2-year term, and those who come on as a representative elected by the different regions, they have a 1-year term. So we always have a little bit of an opportunity to have some consistency from year to year, with some kids having a 2-year term and the rest having a 1-year term.
And this is something that they campaign for, or how does this work?
Well, they filled out an application, and those are reviewed, and then they have, for the representatives, they'll have an interview ahead of time, and then they'll actually get to speak in front of their region and answer a few questions for them, and then that's how, there'll be an election to determine that. And then for National 4-H Conference, they fill out an application as well. Those are reviewed ahead of time. A number of young people will be invited to have an interview during the Kansas Youth Leadership Forum with a committee, and that committee will make the determination on who is going to National Conference and then has those 2-year terms on Youth Council as well.
So this is really valuable for those who want to head down that leadership path.
Most definitely. We love it when kids are ready to step out, and take a new leadership role, and being on the Kansas Youth Leadership Council provides them that opportunity.
As we mentioned, this is a multiple weekend of activities, and the Volunteer Forum is also going on at the same time. What happens for the Volunteer Forum?
The Volunteer Forum is organized by the Kansas Association of 4-H Volunteers, and we just love that the 2 events happen at the same time each year, because it just, it allows us to share Rock Springs together and our speaker, and then they have their own program of conversations with our volunteer specialists, with our state leader. They have some great workshops as well. 48 Hours of 4-H is one of the things they'll be learning about. Also some STEM, which is our science, technology, engineering, and math. They also get an opportunity to tour Rock Springs, because a lot of times our kiddos get to go to Rock Springs, but maybe their parents haven't been there. So that's another opportunity for them. And I know they've got a workshop also on kind of bringing projects to life as a project leader. And, as any conference goes, probably the most valuable part of it is that networking opportunity with other people who are working as a 4-H youth development volunteer, and what they're doing, and, being able to find out new ideas and what's working other places.
Yeah, because this is bringing people together from all across the state.
Exactly, and it's just fun to watch those. We watch those friendships form with our young people, but the very same thing happens with the adults as well.
Again, all of the information is online, and they should go and start the process now, because I think there's an early bird registration and then just a regular registration.
Yeah, correct. So it's just a little cheaper if you register by October the 15th, and then our final registration date is November 1st. So certainly we would encourage everybody to register by October the 15th, but know that, if you don't have your calendar quite figured out, that you have until November the 1st to register.
I would imagine this is one of those popular events. I don't know that it's a first come, first serve. Is there a cutoff?
No, we've typically had enough room. Sometimes we're tight, but we've got enough room. And, I just really encourage people to consider it. The topic of leadership is important for all of us. The setting out at Rock Springs in the fall is absolutely beautiful. Our kids see that in the summer, and it's just a totally different place to be in the fall.
I think that's a good point, because sometimes we don't necessarily think of ourselves as a leader, but we may have some of those skills that really would make us a good leader.
Oh, exactly. And, all of us need new skills, whether we think we are a leader or not. There's always something to learn, and we want people to come away having learned something new.
That's Southeast Area 4-H Specialist Beth Hinshaw. For more information about Kansas 4-H Leadership Weekend or to register, go to kansas4h.org and look under What's Hot. Again, the early bird fee ends today. Regular registration is open through November 1st. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.